Sir, this line is for account holders only. The sentence was not shouted, but it was loud enough to travel across polished marble floors and settle into the quiet hum of First Federal Bank's downtown lobby. Marcus Bennett did not look behind him. He did not check to see if someone else might have been the intended target. The teller was looking directly at him. Mid-40s. Deep brown skin. Charcoal, gray hoodie. Dark tailored trousers. Clean white sneakers. No tie. No briefcase. No visible markers of what people in rooms like this expected wealth to look like. The morning light streamed through the 40-foot glass windows, cutting sharp lines across the white stone counters and chrome stanchions. A digital board flickered softly behind the teller stations, displaying interest rates and smiling stock images of families who looked curated for trust. Marcus stood calmly in the center of it all, a withdrawal slip resting flat between his fingers. $2 million. He had filled it out carefully, block letters, steady hand. Linda Harper, senior teller for 13 years, tilted her head slightly. This line is for account holders, she repeated, slower this time, as if clarity might correct confusion. Marcus met her eyes. His expression did not change. I am an account holder, he said evenly. The words were simple. The tone was unshaken. Linda's lips pressed into something that resembled a smile, but did not reach her eyes. We handle large transactions by appointment, she replied, glancing briefly at the slip without fully taking it from his hand. Especially withdrawals of that size. A few customers in line shifted subtly. A man in a navy suit behind Marcus checked his watch. A woman near the entrance paused mid-step, sensing the tension without understanding it yet. Marcus glanced down at the slip once more, then back up at Linda. Is there a problem with my account? He asked. The question was not defensive. It was precise. Linda tapped a few keys on her keyboard without entering his information. I would need to verify identity first, she said. 2 forms of identification. Marcus reached into his wallet slowly and placed his driver's license on the counter. Then his corporate platinum card. Linda did not pick them up immediately. Instead, she looked past him. Next, she called out. The man in the navy suit stepped forward, hesitated, then slid around Marcus as if navigating an obstacle in a grocery aisle. Linda greeted him with a brighter tone. Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. Marcus did not turn. He remained where he stood, hands resting lightly on the marble surface. The man in the suit completed a deposit in less than 60 seconds. No request for additional identification. No appointment required. When the transaction ended, Linda finally reached for Marcus's driver's license. She examined it longer than necessary. And what is the purpose of this withdrawal? She asked. That information is not required, Marcus replied calmly. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. Large cash movements trigger compliance protocols, she said. We have to be careful. Marcus nodded slightly. So do I. The air shifted. A security guard near the entrance straightened, not moving closer but paying attention now. Linda clicked again, finally pulling up the account. Her posture stiffened for a fraction of a second before she masked it. I am going to need branch manager approval, she said. Please step aside. Marcus did not step aside. He did not raise his voice. I will wait right here, he answered. The guard took one slow step forward. Not aggressive. Observant. Linda picked up the phone and dialed an internal extension. Mr. Caldwell, she said quietly. I need you at Station 3. Within moments, Ethan Caldwell emerged from a glass-walled office overlooking the lobby. Late 30s. Crisp white shirt. Navy tie. Polished demeanor that had been refined through years of client-facing diplomacy. He approached with a professional half-smile. Good morning, he began, extending his hand toward Marcus without fully meeting his eyes. I understand there is a request for a significant withdrawal. Marcus shook his hand briefly. $2 million, he said. Ethan glanced at the screen Linda had angled toward him. That is correct. He cleared his throat softly. We typically require advance notice for amounts exceeding $200,000. Marcus folded his hands calmly. Your website states same-day access for verified account holders. Ethan's smile tightened slightly. That is generally accurate, he said. However, for security reasons, we may require additional steps. Marcus studied him for a moment. What additional steps? Ethan gestured subtly toward his seating area. We can continue this conversation in my office. Marcus did not move. We can continue it here. Silence settled across the immediate area. The woman near the entrance pretended to scroll on her phone, but angled. It slightly. The guard took another measured step forward. Ethan lowered his voice. Sir, we have to protect the bank. Marcus tilted his head slightly. From what? The question landed without accusation. Ethan inhaled. From irregular activity. Marcus's gaze did not waver. There is nothing irregular about accessing your own funds. Linda shifted behind the counter. It is a large amount, she interjected. Marcus looked at her calmly. Large is relative. Ethan finally met Marcus's eyes fully for the first time. Something flickered there. Not recognition. Assessment. May I ask what you do for a living? Ethan said carefully. The question lingered in the air longer than it should have. Marcus's expression remained neutral. Does that affect my balance? Ethan hesitated. No, then it is not relevant. A murmur passed through the line behind them. The man in the navy suit avoided eye contact now. Ethan straightened slightly, adopting firmer posture. I am going to need to escalate this to regional compliance, he said. Marcus nodded once. Go ahead. Ethan seemed momentarily surprised by the lack of resistance. It may take some time, he added. Marcus glanced at the large analog clock mounted above the teller stations. 10:07 a.m., I have time, he said. Ethan returned to his office and closed the glass door halfway. Linda remained at her station, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The guard stood still, hands clasped in front of him. Marcus rested both palms lightly on the counter and looked straight ahead. No frustration, no visible anger, just presence. The clock ticked audibly in the quiet. 10:08 a.m. A customer whispered something under his breath about procedures. Marcus reached into his hoodie pocket and removed his phone. He scrolled once, then selected a contact. He did not lift his voice. Rachel, he said evenly when the call connected. Open the acquisition file for First Federal. Pull up the downtown branch. He listened for a moment. Yes. Now. He ended the call without elaboration. Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. Is there someone we can contact to confirm this transaction? She asked. Marcus placed his phone face down on the marble. You already have, he replied. The clock ticked to 10:09 a.m. Ethan re-emerged from his office, expression more rigid now. Corporate is reviewing, he said. It may take up to 48 hours to release funds of that magnitude. Marcus looked at him steadily. That will not be necessary. Ethan folded his arms lightly. Sir, these are protocols. Marcus gave a small nod. They are about to change. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I assure you, we are acting in accordance with policy. Marcus held his gaze without blinking. So am I. The phone on Linda's desk rang. She glanced at the caller ID and hesitated before answering. Branch 3, she said. Her expression shifted within seconds. She stood straighter. Yes, he is here. Ethan looked at her sharply. Who is that? He asked quietly. Linda swallowed. Regional. Ethan reached for the receiver. This is Ethan Caldwell. His face drained of color as he listened. The customers in line leaned subtly closer, sensing something turn. Marcus remained still, hands resting calmly on the counter, eyes forward. The clock above them read 10:14 a.m. 7 minutes had passed. Ethan's voice lost its earlier firmness. Yes, I understand. He lowered the phone slowly. Linda stared at him. The guard shifted back a step. Ethan cleared his throat, struggling to regain composure. Mr. Bennett, he said, finally using the name displayed on the account. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. Marcus did not smile. There usually is. Ethan glanced at the screen again, then back at Marcus. I was not aware that Bennett Capital finalized acquisition of this bank 3 months ago. The lobby fell silent. Marcus lifted his phone from the counter. Now you are. Ethan swallowed. Linda's hands trembled slightly over the keyboard. Marcus's voice remained level, steady, almost quiet. I came in today to review compliance personally, he said. You denied service. The clock ticked once more. 7 minutes. Marcus added softly. That is how long it took to expose a pattern. He looked around the marble lobby, at the polished counters, at the customers who had watched without intervening. I do not need $2 million in cash, he said. I needed confirmation. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. The phone on the counter rang once more, sharper this time. Linda stared at it, as if it might burn. Marcus folded the withdrawal slip neatly in half. Let us answer that, he said calmly. The phone continued ringing, sharp and insistent against the polished marble silence of the lobby. Linda Harper stared at it as if it had betrayed her personally. Ethan Caldwell's hand hovered over the receiver, hesitation flickering across his face before. He finally picked it up. "Ethan Caldwell speaking," he said, attempting to steady his tone. Marcus Bennett remained where he was, hands relaxed at his sides now, the folded withdrawal slip resting calmly between his fingers. The customers in line had stopped pretending not to listen. The security guard had stepped back near the entrance, posture no longer watchful but uncertain. Ethan's expression shifted again as the voice on the other end spoke. "Yes," he said slowly. "He is here." A pause. "I understand." Another pause, longer this time. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Effective immediately?" His eyes flickered toward Marcus, then away. "Yes, I will comply." He lowered the receiver with deliberate care, as though sudden movement might shatter what was left of his composure. Linda leaned closer. "What did they say?" she whispered. Ethan inhaled, straightened his tie, and looked directly at Marcus. "Corporate compliance has requested that all current transactions be paused," he said. "They are initiating an immediate review of this branch." A faint murmur passed through the lobby. Marcus nodded once. "That is appropriate." Ethan swallowed. "They have also requested that I provide full access to surveillance footage, internal communication logs, and customer complaint records for the past 12 months. Marcus's expression did not change. "That is also appropriate." Linda's hands trembled slightly over the keyboard. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, her earlier certainty dissolving into strain. "We were following protocol." Marcus turned his gaze toward her, calm and unwavering. "Protocol should be consistent," he replied. "Was it?" The question lingered, heavier than accusation. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. The man in the navy suit who had been served moments earlier stepped backward in line, distancing himself from the unfolding gravity. The large analog clock above the teller stations ticked to 10:16 a.m. Two additional bank employees emerged from behind the counters, drawn by the shift in atmosphere. Ethan cleared his throat again. "Mr. Bennett," he said carefully, "we were not informed that you would be visiting this location." Marcus met his eyes. "Ownership does not require announcement." Silence pressed against the marble walls. Ethan's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down at the screen and inhaled sharply. "Regional director on video," he muttered. He tapped the screen and held it upright. The face of a middle-aged woman appeared, composed and unmistakably in command. "Mr. Bennett," she said, addressing Marcus directly. Through the small display. "Thank you for your patience." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "I appreciate the swift response." The regional director's gaze shifted toward Ethan. "Branch operations are suspended pending investigation," she stated clearly. "All staff are to remain on site for review interviews. Security will ensure compliance." The word compliance echoed with quiet finality. Ethan's shoulders lowered a fraction. Linda's breath caught audibly. The regional director continued. "Mr. Bennett, preliminary data indicates this branch has received 14 formal complaints regarding discriminatory service patterns over the last quarter." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the small crowd. Marcus did not react visibly. "And how many were escalated?" he asked evenly. The regional director glanced down at her own screen. "None reached executive review." Marcus nodded once. "That changes today." The call ended. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, as though it had gained unexpected weight. The security guard stepped closer now, not to confront Marcus, but to position himself beside Ethan and Linda. "We have been instructed to cooperate fully," he said quietly. Linda looked from Marcus to Ethan, confusion and realization colliding across her face. "I did not know," she murmured. Marcus's voice remained steady. "You did not need to know who I was," he said. "You needed to know your policy." Linda's eyes dropped to the counter. Ethan took a step forward. "If you had identified yourself earlier, this could have been avoided." Marcus's gaze sharpened slightly, not with anger, but with clarity. If your process required identity beyond account verification, it was already flawed. The customers in line were no longer whispering. They were listening openly now. The woman near the entrance lowered her phone completely. Ethan exhaled, the weight of public scrutiny settling over him. "What happens now?" he asked, the authority in his voice diminished. Marcus glanced around the lobby once more, taking in the polished stone, the promotional posters about trust and integrity, the uniformed staff who had moments earlier operated with confident routine. "Now," he said calmly, "we examine your culture." Linda's shoulders slumped slightly. We treat everyone the same, she insisted, though the words lacked conviction. Marcus's expression did not soften. Consistency is measurable, he replied, and it is about to be measured. Another call rang from the back office. One of the junior tellers hurried to answer it, then froze mid-step as Ethan raised a hand. Let it ring, Ethan said quietly. The clock ticked to 10:18 a.m. Two bank customers approached the counter cautiously. Are we still able to access our accounts? One asked. Ethan forced a professional nod. All digital services remain operational, he replied. In-branch transactions are temporarily paused. Marcus turned slightly toward the customers. Your funds are secure, he said calmly. This review is about service, not solvency. The reassurance carried weight. The regional director's voice echoed faintly from Ethan's phone as she continued coordinating off-screen. Within minutes, two representatives from corporate compliance entered the lobby, badges visible, expressions neutral but focused. They moved with quiet efficiency, positioning themselves near the teller stations. One addressed Ethan directly. We will need your access credentials. Ethan handed over his key card without argument. Linda stepped back from her station as another compliance officer requested her login information. Marcus remained still, observing. No raised voice. No public humiliation. Just process unfolding. The compliance officer turned toward Marcus. Would you like to provide a formal statement now? She asked respectfully. Marcus considered for a moment. I will provide documentation, he said. But what happened here is already visible. He gestured subtly toward the lobby. And recorded. Linda's eyes flicked toward the ceiling cameras. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. Ethan attempted one final defense. We were cautious, he said. Marcus looked at him evenly. Caution applied selectively becomes bias. The words settled into the marble and glass like an engraving. A compliance representative approached with a tablet. Effective immediately, she read. All branch staff are relieved of duty pending investigation. Temporary management will assume control. The sentence did not require volume. It carried consequence on its own. Linda's breath caught again. Ethan's composure fractured just slightly, though he maintained outward restraint. Relieved of duty, he repeated. The compliance officer nodded. You will receive formal communication from human resources within the hour. Customers in the lobby stepped back, absorbing the shift in power. Marcus folded the withdrawal slip once more and placed it gently on the counter. I never intended to remove $2 million, he said calmly. I intended to remove doubt. Ethan's voice lowered. You could have called ahead. Marcus met his gaze one final time. You could have treated me like every other account holder. The silence that followed was not explosive. It was instructive. The compliance officers continued their work with quiet precision, escorting staff toward the back offices for documentation review. The security guard stepped aside fully now, posture no longer protective but procedural. Marcus picked up his phone and glanced briefly at a message from Rachel confirming that regional oversight had already been deployed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The clock above the teller stations ticked to 10:22 a.m. 15 minutes earlier. He had been told to step aside. Now the entire branch stood suspended under review. Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his hoodie calmly. Respect is not a premium feature, he said softly, more to the room than to any one person. It is standard. He turned toward the exit, passing the line of customers who parted instinctively. No one spoke. No one challenged him. The glass doors opened automatically as he approached, letting in the crisp downtown air. Behind him, the marble lobby no longer felt like a place of routine transactions. It felt like a case study in real time. Marcus stepped onto the sidewalk without haste, the sunlight reflecting off the high-rise windows above. He did not look back. The correction had already begun. The downtown wind carried a faint chill as Marcus Bennett stepped onto the sidewalk, the glass doors of the suspended branch closing softly behind him. Traffic moved in steady rhythm along the avenue. Taxis sliding past in flashes of yellow. Office workers crossing at the corner with coffee cups balanced in one hand and phones in the other. The world outside the bank had not paused for what had just unfolded inside, but something fundamental had shifted within those marble walls. Marcus did not rush. He walked half a block before stopping beneath the shade of a steel and glass tower that reflected the morning sun like a blade. His phone vibrated once. Rachel's name illuminated the screen. Preliminary audit confirms pattern indicators, she said as soon as he answered. Her voice was efficient but edged with controlled gravity. 14 formal complaints in 90 days. 8 of them flagged for inconsistent identification requests. 3 specifically mentioned selective enforcement tied to appearance. Marcus watched a city bus kneel at the curb to collect passengers. Escalation history, he asked calmly. None reached executive level, Rachel replied. They were resolved locally. Marcus exhaled slowly. Resolved? He repeated, not as a question but as a diagnosis. I am scheduling a full compliance review across all metropolitan branches, Rachel continued. We will need your authorization to proceed with structural suspension beyond this location if necessary. Marcus glanced back toward the bank building. Through the tall windows, he could see compliance officers moving deliberately behind the counters, clipboards in hand, controlled and procedural. You have it, he said. Begin with customer data variance analysis. I want transaction patterns cross-referenced with demographic complaint reports. Understood, Rachel replied. Media risk? Marcus shook his head slightly, though she could not see him. No statements, he said. This is internal correction, not public spectacle. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The sound of a distant siren blended into the rhythm of the city. A man in a tailored coat brushed past him without recognition. That anonymity remained one of Marcus's quiet tools. Power without announcement. Accountability without performance. Inside the branch, the marble lobby felt different now. Ethan Caldwell stood beside a compliance officer reviewing printed transaction logs, his earlier confidence replaced by a restrained urgency. Linda Harper sat at a small desk in the corner, answering structured questions from another investigator. Did you request 2 forms of identification from every customer exceeding 5 figures? The compliance officer asked evenly. Linda hesitated. We assess risk, she said. Based on what criteria? The officer pressed. Linda glanced toward Ethan instinctively before responding. Transaction size. Behavior. The officer did not react. Define behavior. Linda's silence lengthened. Ethan cleared his throat across the room, but the officer raised a hand slightly to maintain focus. We will rely on documentation, she said calmly. Assumptions are not measurable. The clock above the teller stations continued its steady ticking, indifferent to careers unraveling beneath it. Outside, Marcus began walking again, heading toward a nearby cafe he frequented during quarterly visits. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as he entered. The aroma of roasted beans and fresh pastries filled the air. The barista greeted him with a nod. The usual? She asked. Marcus returned the nod. Yes. No hesitation. No secondary verification. Just service aligned with expectation. He took a seat near the window, watching pedestrians move past while his mind recalibrated the larger structure. The acquisition of First Federal had been finalized quietly 3 months earlier through Bennett Capital's holding network. The board had viewed it as a strategic expansion into regional lending markets. Marcus had viewed it as an opportunity to reshape institutional culture from within. What had occurred in the lobby that morning was not unexpected. It was data materialized. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was the regional director. We have secured all internal logs, she said. Preliminary review confirms disproportionate identification requests on accounts associated with minority names. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the confirmation without surprise. Immediate corrective action? He asked. Branch staff remain suspended, she replied. We are preparing termination recommendations, pending full review. Marcus stirred his coffee slowly. Focus on pattern, not punishment, he said. If the structure allowed bias to pass unchecked, then the structure changes. The regional director paused. Understood. Inside the bank, customers continued arriving, confused by the posted notice that in-branch transactions were temporarily unavailable. A compliance officer addressed them politely, redirecting them to digital services. Some expressed frustration. Others whispered about what they had witnessed earlier. Ethan stood near his former office door, hands clasped, listening as investigators replayed security footage on a tablet. The video displayed his interaction with Marcus from multiple angles. Calm voice. Firm tone. Additional identification requested. The sequence was clear. Ethan swallowed as he watched himself ask about Marcus's profession. That question was unnecessary. the investigator noted quietly. Ethan did not argue. Linda's interview continued. Were you aware of previous complaints? The officer asked. Linda nodded faintly. They were addressed, she said. How? Coaching, she replied. Was policy revised? Linda hesitated again. No, the officer made a notation. Outside, Marcus finished his coffee and checked the time. It had been less than an hour since he entered the branch. Structural inertia often lasted years. Today it had lasted 7 minutes. He stood and walked back toward the building, not to reclaim authority, but to observe continuity. Through the glass, he could see compliance staff installing temporary signage. The polished marble still reflected light, but the atmosphere no longer carried silent hierarchy. It carried examination. His phone buzzed once more. A message from Rachel confirmed that Human Resources had drafted formal termination notices for senior branch leadership pending final approval. Marcus typed a brief response. Proceed with documented evidence only. No emotional language. Policy violation summary attached. He slipped the phone away and stepped inside the lobby again. Conversations quieted at his presence, but he did not command attention. He walked toward the compliance officer in charge. Status? He asked calmly. We are compiling a full variance report, she replied. Preliminary findings indicate selective enforcement concentrated within this branch and 2 additional urban locations. Marcus nodded. Extend review immediately. Ethan approached slowly, his earlier posture replaced by controlled humility. Mr. Bennett, he said, voice measured. I would like to acknowledge that our approach this morning may have lacked balance. Marcus studied him without hostility. Balance requires awareness, he replied. Were you aware? Ethan looked down briefly. Not sufficiently. Marcus inclined his head slightly. That is the issue. Linda remained seated, her interview concluding. She looked toward Marcus as he turned to leave once more. I did not intend disrespect, she said quietly. Marcus paused, meeting her eyes. Intent does not erase impact, he said evenly. Process must protect both. He stepped outside again, the glass doors parting with automatic precision. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the sidewalk. Across the street, pedestrians continued their routines unaware of internal recalibrations unfolding behind tinted glass. Marcus adjusted the sleeves of his hoodie and began walking toward his waiting car parked 2 blocks away. His reflection moved alongside him in the mirrored surface of the high-rise windows, steady and composed. He did not feel triumphant. He felt aligned. The branch had not collapsed in anger. It had paused in correction. And correction, when structured, ripples beyond a single address. As he reached the corner and waited for the crosswalk signal to change, his phone vibrated one final time. Rachel's message read, corporate memo drafted. Implementation begins tomorrow. Marcus looked up at the skyline rising above him, steel and glass intersecting against a clear blue sky. Tomorrow, he repeated softly, as the pedestrian signal flashed white and the city moved forward with him. The next morning, before the city fully awakened, an internal memorandum moved quietly through encrypted corporate channels. By 8 o'clock Eastern Time, every regional director, compliance officer, and senior manager across First Federal Bank had received it. The subject line was simple and clinical, immediate structural review and cultural compliance directive. Marcus Bennett stood in his corner office 300 feet above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the early light as it climbed between steel towers. He wore the same charcoal hoodie, sleeves pushed back slightly, hands resting on the glass conference table in front of him. Across the table sat Rachel, laptop open, analytics dashboards glowing in precise grids of data. Variance reports from 3 additional branches are in, she said calmly. 2 show mild inconsistency. 1 shows elevated disparity in identification requests exceeding 5 figures. Marcus studied the charts projected onto the wall. Blue bars. Red indicators. Percentage deviations measured to 2 decimal points. Initiate immediate audit in the elevated branch, he said. Deploy training reinforcement in the others. Rachel nodded, fingers moving efficiently across the keyboard. Human Resources has drafted termination letters for the downtown branch manager and senior teller, she added. Marcus paused for a moment before responding. Ensure documentation references policy breach and measurable discrepancy, he said. No moral commentary. Rachel glanced up. Understood. Downstairs, The executive boardroom began to fill. Directors from finance, operations, and legal took their seats around the long walnut table. A large display screen showed the bank's logo fading into the new directive summary. Marcus entered without announcement, taking the head seat with quiet authority. He did not clear his throat. He did not dramatize the moment. Yesterday, he began evenly. A routine transaction request exposed a pattern. He pressed a remote, and surveillance still images appeared on the screen. His own figure at the teller counter. The request for additional identification. The question about profession. This is not about me, he continued. It is about measurable inconsistency. The room remained silent. A legal advisor leaned forward. Exposure risk? She asked. Marcus shook his head slightly. Contained. Internal. He changed the slide. 14 formal complaints highlighted in red. None escalated beyond branch resolution. Failure to escalate is a structural flaw, he said. Correction begins at oversight. A finance director cleared his throat. Public relations? Marcus met his gaze calmly. We do not repair culture for headlines, he replied. We repair it because it is correct. The clarity of his tone left little room for debate. Across the city, the downtown branch remained closed, signage posted neatly on the glass doors informing customers of temporary review. Inside, compliance officers continued analyzing transaction logs, cross-referencing demographic indicators with service records. Ethan Caldwell sat alone in a small conference room, reviewing the formal notice placed before him. Effective immediately, pending final determination, employment suspended for policy breach and compliance failure. He read the words twice, then folded the document carefully. There was no raised voice in the room. No spectacle. Only consequence documented in black ink. Linda Harper sat in a separate room, eyes lowered as an investigator summarized the findings. Selective identification requests were documented in 8 of 14 complaint cases, the investigator said evenly. In 3 cases, similarly situated customers were processed without additional verification. Linda pressed her hands together. I was being cautious, she said quietly. The investigator nodded once. Caution must be applied equally. The word equally lingered in the quiet air. Back in the boardroom, Marcus concluded his presentation with a final slide. Implementation timeline. Day 1, branch suspension. Day 2, regional audit expansion. Day 5, policy revision rollout. Day 10, mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff. He set the remote down gently. Respect cannot be discretionary, he said. It must be procedural. A board member near the far end of the table spoke carefully. This may impact short-term performance metrics. Marcus's expression remained steady. Integrity is a long-term metric, he replied. No one argued further. The vote to formalize the directive passed unanimously. Outside the boardroom, Rachel distributed updated compliance templates to regional managers nationwide. A new clause had been added in bold type. Verification standards must be applied uniformly regardless of perceived socioeconomic indicators. The wording was deliberate, precise, not emotional, structural. By mid-afternoon, an internal training module went live across all branches. The introductory slide displayed a simple sentence in clean white font against a dark background. Consistency protects trust. Employees logged in from break rooms and back offices, watching examples of acceptable verification procedures and documented case studies of bias disguised as caution. No names were mentioned. No personal humiliation was broadcast. The incident had been transformed into data. In the suspended downtown branch, compliance officers removed Ethan's key card access permanently. A human resources representative handed him a sealed envelope containing formal termination documentation. Final review confirms policy violation, she said evenly. Ethan accepted it with restrained composure. There was no confrontation, only closure. Linda received similar documentation an hour later. She read the final line carefully. Employment terminated effective immediately for failure to uphold uniform verification standards. She nodded faintly, as if acknowledging something she could no longer argue against. Outside, the glass facade reflected the afternoon sun as pedestrians continued their routines, unaware of the institutional shift unfolding behind tinted windows. Back at headquarters, Marcus stood once more at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Rachel approached quietly. Termination confirmed, she said. Regional oversight installed. At the downtown branch. Interim manager assigned. Marcus nodded once. Customer communication? He asked. Digital statement posted, Rachel replied. Temporary closure for service optimization. Marcus allowed the faintest hint of a smile. Accurate, he said. The phone on the conference table buzzed with a notification from the compliance dashboard. Audit expansion complete. No further elevated branches detected beyond initial findings. Marcus exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in confirmation. Correction had been localized. Structural flaw identified and addressed before it metastasized. He turned from the window and walked back toward his desk, posture unchanged from the moment he first stood at the teller counter the previous morning. Calm, direct, unmoved by volume. His phone vibrated again. A short message from Rachel appeared. Corporate memo released. Implementation begins immediately. Marcus typed a brief response. Monitor metrics daily. He placed the phone down and looked at the skyline stretching beyond the glass. Steel, glass, concrete. Structures built to endure pressure. Culture required similar engineering. Down at street level, the temporary signage remained on the downtown branch doors. Customers read it, adjusted, moved on. Within days, the branch would reopen under new leadership, new oversight, and revised procedure. Inside, the marble floors would gleam the same way they had before. The difference would not be visible in the architecture. It would be embedded in the process. Marcus rested his hands lightly on the desk and spoke softly into the quiet room, not to anyone present, but as a reaffirmation. You denied service, he said. We denied permission. The words were not triumphant. They were measured. Outside, the city moved forward as it always had, unaware that in less than 24 hours, 7 minutes had rewritten an institution standard. And as the sun dipped slightly lower across the skyline, Marcus remained exactly as he had been at the counter. Calm, precise, unshaken. 5 days after the suspension notice was issued, the downtown branch reopened under new leadership. The temporary signage had been removed from the glass doors, replaced with a subtle placard that read Service Enhancement Complete. The marble floors gleamed as they always had. The counters shined under recessed lighting. The architecture had not changed. The structure behind it had. Marcus Bennett stood across the street early that morning, hands in the pockets of his charcoal hoodie, observing without ceremony. He did not arrive with an entourage. He did not notify the interim manager of his presence. He simply watched as the first customers approached the entrance and stepped inside. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors opened automatically. Inside, a new branch manager, Caroline Pierce, stood near the entrance greeting customers personally. Her tone was professional but measured. Behind her, the teller stations were staffed by reassigned employees who had completed expedited retraining modules over the previous 72 hours. Each workstation displayed a small laminated card near the keyboard that read Uniform Verification. No exceptions. Marcus crossed the street when the pedestrian signal changed and entered the branch without hesitation. The interior felt familiar but recalibrated. Conversations were quieter, more deliberate. The air carried attentiveness rather than assumption. Caroline noticed him immediately and stepped forward. Good morning, she said evenly. Welcome to First Federal. Marcus met her gaze calmly. Good morning. She extended her hand. Caroline Pierce, interim branch manager. He shook her hand once. Marcus Bennett. There was no flicker of surprise in her expression. She had been briefed thoroughly. We appreciate your visit, she replied. Marcus glanced around the lobby. A middle-aged woman stood at Station 2 requesting a cashier's check. The teller requested identification in a steady, consistent tone. The woman produced her driver's license. The teller verified it quickly and proceeded. At Station 4, a man in work boots and a construction jacket requested a withdrawal of $12,000. The teller requested identification in the same tone. No hesitation. No variation. Marcus watched closely. Caroline followed his gaze. We revised internal scripting, she said quietly. All identification requests are phrased identically regardless of transaction size or customer presentation. Marcus nodded once. Metrics, he asked. Caroline gestured toward her tablet. Real-time monitoring active. Compliance variance alerts trigger immediately. Marcus stepped toward an open teller station. A young employee greeted him politely. How may I assist you today? Marcus placed a simple deposit slip on the counter. $500. The teller smiled. "May I please see your identification?" she asked, tone steady and neutral. Marcus handed over his driver's license without comment. She scanned it efficiently and completed the transaction within seconds. No extra scrutiny. No additional commentary. The process felt procedural rather than personal. "Thank you for banking with us," she said sincerely. Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." He stepped aside and observed another interaction. An elderly white couple approached with a request to transfer funds between accounts. The teller asked for identification using the same wording, the same cadence. Marcus watched their reaction. They complied without objection. Consistency normalized the request. Caroline approached him again. "We have implemented daily audits for the next 30 days, she said. Regional compliance receives summary reports each evening. Marcus considered that for a moment. 30 days becomes habit, he said quietly. Habit becomes culture. Caroline nodded. Understood. Near the entrance, a customer who had witnessed the incident 5 days earlier paused as he recognized Marcus. The man hesitated before approaching. "I was here last week," he said cautiously. "I saw what happened." Marcus met his eyes without defensiveness. "And?" he asked gently. The man shifted slightly. "It feels different today." Marcus glanced around the lobby again. "It is," he replied simply. The man nodded and walked toward a teller station without further comment. Inside a small office near the back, a compliance officer monitored live transaction logs on a large screen. Identification requests were time-stamped automatically. Any deviation triggered a yellow alert. None had appeared since opening. Caroline checked the dashboard briefly and allowed herself a quiet breath. Marcus stepped closer to the glass wall of the office and observed the data feed scrolling in measured rhythm. "Technology reinforces accountability," he said. Caroline responded carefully. "Accountability reinforces trust." He turned toward her. "Trust cannot rely on discretion," he said. "It relies on design." She absorbed that without defensiveness. The morning progressed smoothly. Customers moved through lines at a steady pace. No raised voices. No selective caution. Marcus remained for nearly an hour, blending into the routine he had once disrupted. When he finally stepped outside, the sun reflected off the high-rise windows across the street just as it had days before. The city continued its rhythm, unaware of the micro shifts embedded within marble walls. His phone vibrated lightly. Rachel's message appeared. "Downtown branch variance report. Zero discrepancy since reopening." Marcus typed back. "Continue monitoring. Extend model to all urban branches." He placed the phone in his pocket and began walking toward his car. Inside the branch, Caroline gathered her team briefly before the lunch hour. "Consistency is not optional," she said evenly. "It protects you as much as it protects customers." The tellers nodded, some more firmly than others. At Station 3, a young teller glanced at the laminated card again, reading the words silently. "Uniform verification. No exceptions." The phrase no longer felt punitive. It felt clear. Back at headquarters, Rachel reviewed incoming compliance data from multiple cities. Early indicators showed minimal deviation. The memo Marcus had approved was circulating quietly through managerial channels. Policy updates embedded themselves into employee portals, onboarding documents, and training modules. The correction was not loud. It was systematic. Later that afternoon, Marcus stood once more in his office overlooking the skyline. He removed his hoodie and draped it over the back of a chair, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt beneath. The city shimmered below him, indifferent and vast. His phone buzzed again. A short message from Caroline. "First full day complete. All transactions verified consistently. Thank you." Marcus considered the words for a moment before responding. "No thanks required. Maintain the standard." He placed the phone down and looked out across the glass horizon. The branch had reopened. The staff had changed. The language had shifted. The design now required equality rather than assuming it. He did not feel vindicated. He felt steady. A single encounter at a marble counter had revealed a fracture. The response had not been emotional. It had been structural. And structure, once corrected, holds longer than anger ever could. As the sun began to lower across the skyline, Marcus folded his hands behind his back and stood quietly, knowing that the true measure of the moment was not the termination notices or the public silence. It was the quiet normalization of fairness inside a room that once hesitated. The bank doors would open again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The marble floors would shine. Customers would line up. Identification would be requested in the same tone for every face. And no one would need to know why it had changed. 2 weeks after the downtown branch reopened, the numbers told a quiet story. Variance alerts remained at 0. Identification requests matched transaction thresholds precisely across demographic categories. Customer satisfaction surveys reflected subtle but measurable improvement. The correction had not made headlines. It had made patterns. Marcus Bennett stood in the Executive Operations Center reviewing the latest compliance dashboard projected across a 12-foot screen. Blue indicators glowed steadily. No red markers pulsed. Rachel stood beside him with a tablet in hand. Urban branches report consistent implementation, she said calmly. Rural branches are adapting more slowly, but variance remains within acceptable range. Marcus folded his arms loosely. Adaptation becomes expectation, he replied. Reinforce training before complacency returns. Rachel nodded. Quarterly ethics module is being updated to include scenario simulations based on the downtown incident. Marcus's expression remained neutral. Remove reference to the location, he said. Focus on the structure. Across the country, branch managers logged into the updated training portal. The opening slide displayed a simple sentence in clear font. Consistency is protection. A narrated module walked employees through examples of selective caution disguised as diligence. No names. No blame. Just measurable correction. In the reopened downtown branch, Caroline Pierce reviewed the second week's audit summary with her team during a brief morning huddle. Uniform language. Uniform procedure, she said evenly. It protects the bank. It protects you. The tellers listened attentively. The laminated cards remained at each station, no longer reminders of reprimand, but anchors of clarity. A customer approached with a request to withdraw $25,000. The teller followed the script precisely, tone neutral, pace steady. Identification requested. Verified. Transaction completed. No extra scrutiny. No variation. Marcus entered quietly once more that afternoon, not to inspect, but to experience the atmosphere without influence. He wore the same charcoal hoodie, hands relaxed at his sides. The lobby felt lighter now, not because of decoration, but because hesitation had been replaced by routine. A young man in athletic wear stood at a counter requesting to open a new account. The banker explained documentation requirements clearly and evenly. No coded glances. No assumptions. Marcus observed from a distance. Caroline noticed him and approached. Compliance report sent this morning, she said quietly. 0 discrepancies. Marcus nodded. Metrics confirm behavior, he said. Behavior confirms culture. Caroline hesitated briefly. Some employees initially felt scrutinized, she admitted. They understand now that scrutiny was systemic, not personal. Marcus looked toward the teller stations. Systems shape decisions, he said. People operate within what they are allowed. Caroline absorbed that without argument. Near the entrance, an older man who had banked there for years paused to speak with Caroline. Things feel more organized lately, he commented casually. Caroline smiled politely. We have standardized our procedures, she replied. The man nodded, unaware of the structural recalibration beneath that word standardized. Back at headquarters, Rachel reviewed a heat map displaying identification request patterns across every branch nationwide. The color gradient remained uniform. She forwarded the image to Marcus with a brief note. Baseline stabilized. Marcus studied it for a moment before replying. Maintain oversight. Quiet consistency prevents loud correction. He stepped away from his desk and walked toward the window overlooking the skyline. Afternoon light reflected off mirrored towers. Cars moved steadily along the streets below, unaware of policy revisions unfolding above them. His phone vibrated again. A message from the regional director appeared. Final termination documentation processed. Replacement hire scheduled for onboarding next Monday. Marcus typed a concise response. Ensure onboarding includes uniform verification directive from day one. No legacy gaps. He placed the phone down and rested his hands on the cool glass of the window. The downtown branch had been the catalyst, but the true objective had always been structural alignment across the institution. Later that week, a closed-door executive session convened at headquarters. Board members reviewed quarterly performance metrics alongside compliance indicators. Revenue projections remained stable. Customer retention slightly improved. One director leaned forward. The corrective measures did not harm profitability, he observed. Marcus met his gaze calmly. Equity strengthens sustainability, he replied. Another director asked, do you anticipate recurrence? Marcus considered carefully before answering. Human bias does not disappear, he said evenly. It requires design to prevent it from shaping decisions. The room remained quiet in agreement. The vote to formalize the Uniform Verification Directive permanently within corporate governance passed unanimously. It would now be embedded not only in training modules, but in executive evaluation metrics and branch performance reviews. Down at the downtown branch, a young teller named Sophia completed her shift and logged out of the compliance dashboard. She paused briefly to glance at the laminated card beside her keyboard. Uniform verification. No exceptions. She no longer read it defensively. She read it as assurance. As she left the branch that evening, the glass doors closed behind her with automatic precision. Marcus returned once more to the branch on a quiet Friday afternoon, not announcing himself, blending into the line like any other customer. When his turn arrived, he approached the counter and requested a cashier's check for $15,000. The teller requested identification in the same tone she had used with every customer before him. Marcus handed it over without comment. The transaction processed smoothly. Thank you for your business, she said politely. Marcus inclined his head. Thank you for your consistency, he replied. She smiled, unaware of the layered meaning. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Marcus stepped onto the street and paused briefly, observing the reflection of the bank's facade in the windows of the building across from it. The marble floors inside would continue to shine. The counters would remain polished. The architecture would remain unchanged. What had shifted was invisible but embedded. Procedure had replaced presumption. Design had replaced discretion. His phone vibrated lightly one final time that day. Rachel's message read, National Compliance Alignment Achieved. Marcus read it once and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He did not feel victory. He felt steadiness. The moment at the counter weeks earlier had not required raised voices or public spectacle. It had required clarity and structure. As he began walking down the avenue, merging into the steady current of pedestrians beneath a fading sky, he reflected quietly on the difference between reaction and reform. Reaction is loud. Reform is deliberate. The bank doors behind him opened and closed as customers entered and exited, unaware of the recalibration beneath their transactions. Marcus did not look back. He did not need to. The standard had been written into the system. And systems, once aligned, endure longer than any single encounter ever could. 30 days after the downtown branch recalibrated its procedures, the change had moved beyond compliance reports and into quiet normalization. Customers no longer paused when asked for identification. Employees no longer adjusted their tone based on perception. The language had stabilized. The design had held. Marcus Bennett stood in the National Strategy Room at headquarters, a circular space lined with digital screens displaying real-time data from every branch across the country. The numbers no longer felt reactive. They felt patterned. Rachel stood beside him reviewing the monthly alignment report. Uniform verification adherence remains above 99%, she said calmly. Complaint submissions have decreased significantly. However, we have identified one emerging issue. Marcus shifted his gaze toward the screen she expanded. A suburban branch in another state showed subtle variance. Not dramatic, not blatant, but measurable. Explain, he said evenly. Rachel tapped the display. Identification is being requested consistently, but transaction approvals above $50,000 show extended review times when associated with specific zip codes. Marcus studied the map overlay. The highlighted zip codes correlated with predominantly minority neighborhoods. The variance was small, but it was present. Who manages that branch? He asked. Rachel pulled up the profile. Daniel Whitmore. 10 years with the bank. Strong performance history. Marcus nodded once. Schedule a quiet visit, he said. No announcement. 2 days later, Marcus arrived at the suburban branch mid-morning. The building stood in a shopping center between a grocery store and a pharmacy. Brick facade. Neutral signage. Inside, the lobby carried the same polished marble and uniform counters as the downtown location. Daniel Whitmore stood near the front greeting customers. Early 40s. Crisp blazer. Confident posture. When Marcus entered wearing his charcoal hoodie and tailored trousers, Daniel offered a polite nod without recognition. "Welcome," he said evenly. Marcus returned the nod and stepped into line. A customer ahead of him, a white businessman in a tailored suit, requested a wire transfer of $75,000. Identification was requested in consistent tone. Verified. Transaction processed within minutes. Marcus observed carefully. When his turn arrived, he approached the counter and requested a wire transfer of the same amount to a verified investment account. The teller requested identification without hesitation. Marcus provided it. The teller scanned the information and paused briefly. "I will need managerial approval for this amount," she said politely. Marcus nodded. "Of course." Daniel approached with composed professionalism. "Good morning," he said. "For transactions exceeding $50,000, we conduct additional review." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Was that conducted for the previous customer?" Daniel hesitated slightly. "Yes," he replied. Marcus did not raise his voice. "Duration?" Daniel glanced toward the teller, who shifted uncomfortably. "It varies," he said. Marcus met his gaze without accusation. "Variance should be procedural, not personal." The silence that followed was subtle but revealing. Daniel motioned toward his office. "May we speak privately?" Marcus agreed and stepped inside the glass-walled room. Daniel closed the door halfway. "If there is a concern," Daniel began carefully, "we are following compliance guidelines." Marcus sat across from him calmly. "Guidelines allow discretion," he said. "Design limits discretion." Daniel's expression tightened slightly. "Are you suggesting bias?" Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he removed his phone and opened a dashboard view, turning the screen toward Daniel. A chart displayed average approval times segmented by zip code. The pattern was undeniable. Daniel's posture shifted. "I was not aware," he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. "Awareness precedes correction." Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing. "The team may be exercising extra caution based on risk indicators," he offered. Marcus folded his hands calmly. "Risk must be defined by transaction history, not geography." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I see the discrepancy." Marcus stood, then corrected. He walked out of the office without raising his voice or invoking title. Daniel followed moments later, calling a brief team meeting near the teller stations. Customers continued their transactions unaware of the quiet recalibration taking place. Effective immediately, Daniel said evenly to his staff, "Approval timelines must match documented criteria only. No variance beyond transaction history." The tellers nodded, some exchanging quick glances. Marcus remained near the entrance observing. Within minutes, another customer requested a $65,000 transfer. Identification requested. Manager approval initiated. Completed within 2 minutes. No extended review. Marcus watched the timestamp on his phone. Consistency restored. Daniel approached him once more. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," he said. Marcus met his gaze calmly. "Prevention is quieter than termination," he replied. Daniel understood the weight of that sentence. Later that afternoon, Rachel updated the national dashboard. The suburban branch variance indicator returned to baseline. She forwarded the revised metrics to Marcus with a short message. "Correction confirmed." Marcus responded simply, "Monitor weekly." That evening, Daniel gathered his team again before closing. "Data does not lie," he said evenly. "If we allow perception to influence pace, we undermine trust." The words were not defensive. They were reflective. At headquarters the following week, Marcus addressed senior leadership during a quarterly review session. He displayed both the downtown branch case and the suburban variance example side by side. "Correction is not an event," he said calmly. "It is a discipline." A board member leaned forward. "How long do we maintain oversight?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Indefinitely." Silence followed, not from disagreement, but from recognition. The skyline outside the conference room glowed under late afternoon light as traffic moved steadily below. The institution had not collapsed under scrutiny. It had strengthened. Marcus stepped away from the display and rested his hands lightly on the conference table. "Equity cannot depend on who is watching," he said quietly. "It must operate when no one is." The directors nodded in agreement. Later that evening, Marcus returned to the downtown branch one final time before the end of the quarter. The lobby carried its usual rhythm. A diverse line of customers waited. Patiently. Identification was requested uniformly. Approval timelines matched precisely. No hesitation. No variation. He approached the counter for a simple balance inquiry. The teller smiled politely. "May I see your identification?" she asked in steady tone. Marcus handed it over and waited. Seconds later, the balance appeared on the screen. The transaction ended without drama. He stepped outside into the cool evening air and paused briefly beneath the fading light. The marble inside reflected consistency now, not assumption. The structure had been tested twice and recalibrated twice. Not through anger, through design. His phone vibrated softly with a final message from Rachel. Quarterly compliance alignment achieved nationwide. Marcus looked up at the skyline, glass towers reflecting the last streaks of sunlight. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and began walking down the sidewalk, blending into the rhythm of the city. The correction had moved beyond a single branch, beyond a single moment. It had become architecture. And architecture, once engineered with intention, endures. 60 days after the first 7 minutes changed the direction of an institution, the shift no longer felt reactive. It felt embedded. First Federal's quarterly compliance summit filled the main auditorium at headquarters, a space lined with muted gray panels and a 12-foot digital screen stretching across the front wall. Regional directors, branch managers, compliance analysts, and executive officers occupied tiered seating in disciplined rows. Marcus Bennett stood backstage for a moment before stepping into the light. He wore the same charcoal hoodie beneath a tailored dark jacket, the balance between accessibility and authority intentional but understated. The room quieted as he approached the center of the stage. He did not begin with data. He began with silence. Then he spoke evenly. 2 months ago, a routine transaction revealed a pattern. The screen behind him displayed a clean timeline. Day 1, branch suspension. Day 5, policy revision. Day 30, national alignment. He did not display names. He did not replay footage. He presented structure. Bias rarely announces itself, he continued calmly. It disguises itself as caution, as efficiency, as discretion. The words carried across the room without force. A graph appeared behind him showing identification request consistency across demographic categories. The lines now overlapped almost perfectly. Design corrects what discretion distorts, he said. In the audience, Caroline Pierce from the downtown branch sat upright, hands folded in her lap. Daniel Whitmore from the suburban branch leaned forward slightly, eyes focused on the screen displaying the once elevated variance in his region that had since returned to baseline. Marcus shifted to the next slide. A single phrase filled the display in bold white letters against a dark background. Consistency protects trust. He stepped away from the podium and addressed the room without notes. We did not respond with anger, he said quietly. We responded with architecture. The phrase lingered. We did not correct individuals alone. We corrected the system that allowed variance to survive. Rachel, seated in the front row, tapped her tablet and a live compliance dashboard illuminated on the screen. Real-time data flowed from hundreds of branches nationwide. No red alerts. No yellow warnings. Just steady blue indicators signifying uniform adherence. Marcus gestured toward the display. This is not a celebration, he said. It is maintenance. A regional director raised his hand. How do we ensure this does not erode over time? Marcus met his gaze calmly. By embedding it into executive evaluation metrics, he replied. Leadership compensation now includes compliance consistency. A subtle ripple moved through the room. Structural incentive replaced verbal encouragement. Another executive asked, what if complaints decrease because customers stop reporting? Marcus nodded once. Then we measure internal patterns regardless of complaint volume, he said. Data does not depend on comfort. The summit continued with panel discussions, scenario simulations, and revised escalation protocols. Caroline spoke briefly about the downtown branch transformation. Uniform scripting removed ambiguity, she said. Employees feel protected by clarity. Daniel addressed the suburban variance case openly. We believed we were being thorough, he admitted. Data showed we were being selective. His tone carried accountability without defensiveness. Marcus listened without interruption, allowing transparency to strengthen rather than weaken authority. During a short break, he stepped into the hallway outside the auditorium. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, sunlight reflecting off neighboring towers. Rachel joined him quietly. Media inquiries are beginning to surface, she said. Industry analysts have noticed the policy adjustments. Marcus folded his arms loosely. If asked, we state facts, he replied. We do not dramatize correction. Rachel nodded. Understood. Back inside, the final session of the summit focused on future safeguards. An external ethics consultant presented comparative data from other institutions. First Federal now ranked above industry average in uniform compliance metrics. Marcus returned to the stage for closing remarks. He did not raise his voice. The goal is not perfection, he said steadily. It is predictability. He paused, scanning the room. When a customer walks into any branch, they should encounter the same process regardless of appearance, attire, or perceived status. That is not generosity. It is design. Applause followed, restrained but sincere. As the summit concluded, executives dispersed in quiet conversation. Caroline approached Marcus near the stage. The downtown branch has not recorded a single discrepancy since reopening, she said. Marcus inclined his head slightly. Consistency becomes culture when reinforced, he replied. Daniel joined them briefly. We have implemented daily micro-audits, he added. The team understands now that vigilance is not suspicion. It is structure. Marcus offered a brief nod. Later that afternoon, he returned to his office. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass, traffic moving in disciplined lines below. He removed his jacket and set it aside, standing quietly for a moment before reviewing the final summit report on his tablet. Implementation confirmed. Executive compensation metrics adjusted. National alignment sustained. He sent a brief message to Rachel. Maintain oversight beyond quarterly cycle. Correction is continuous. He set the tablet down and walked toward the window. In the reflection, he saw not the moment at the teller counter, but the structure that followed it. A quiet recalibration engineered through policy rather than performance. His phone vibrated with a notification from the compliance dashboard. One minor yellow alert in a small rural branch. Identification request omitted during a $5,000 transaction. Marcus read the alert once and forwarded it to the regional manager with a single instruction. Immediate retraining. No delay. Within minutes, confirmation returned. Correction applied. He allowed himself a small breath. Not relief. Alignment. As the sun lowered across the skyline, casting long shadows over steel and glass, Marcus reflected on the nature of authority. Power declared loudly is fragile. Power embedded quietly endures. Down in branches across the country, tellers requested identification in uniform tone. Managers approved transactions based on documented criteria. Customers moved through marble lobbies without sensing the data architecture beneath their routine interactions. The institution did not appear transformed from the outside. Its logo remained the same. Its counters still gleamed. Its advertisements still displayed smiling families. The transformation existed within policy documents, compliance dashboards, and discipline language spoken in steady cadence. Marcus stepped away from the window and picked up his phone one final time that evening. A message from Rachel read, National audit complete. No structural gaps detected. He typed back a single response. Continue measuring. He placed the phone face down on his desk and turned off the office lights. As he exited the building, the automatic doors slid open without hesitation, just as they had weeks before. The difference was not in the doors. It was in the design that determined what happened once someone stepped through them. Marcus walked into the cooling evening air, blending into the steady rhythm of the city once more. The correction was no longer reactive. It was operational. And operational change, once engineered with intention, carries further than any single moment of confrontation ever could. 3 months after the compliance summit, the shift inside First Federal was no longer reactive, and it was no longer new. It had become expectation. The marble floors in every branch still reflected the overhead lights the same way they always had. The counters were still polished. The digital boards still displayed interest rates and smiling stock photos of families who trusted the institution with their savings. But beneath that surface, the architecture had changed permanently. Marcus Bennett stood in the executive review room on a quiet Monday morning, watching a live national dashboard scroll across a wall of glass screens. Identification consistency remained above 99% across all regions. Escalation protocols were being followed in real time. Approval timelines were balanced across transaction size, not zip code. The red alerts that once pulsed like warning lights were gone. In their place was steady blue. Rachel stepped into the room holding a printed summary. Independent external audit completed, she said evenly. They found no structural bias within current procedures. Marcus folded his arms loosely, studying the numbers one more time. Not within procedure, he said quietly. Procedure is designed. Rachel understood the distinction. Bias does not disappear. It waits for gaps. Later that week, Marcus scheduled an unannounced visit to a branch in a mid-sized city several states away. It was not flagged. It was not under suspicion. That was the point. He arrived just after lunch, wearing the same charcoal hoodie, the same quiet presence that once triggered assumption. The branch interior felt calm, orderly, predictable. A young teller greeted him with neutral professionalism. How may I assist you today? Marcus requested a certified check for $40,000. Identification was requested in steady tone. He provided it. The teller verified it without hesitation and processed the request efficiently. No delay, no additional questions. The manager walked past and offered a polite nod, unaware of the man's ownership stake. Marcus observed the approval timestamp on his phone. 1 minute and 32 seconds. Within baseline range. He stepped aside and watched the next interaction. A white customer in a tailored suit requested a wire transfer of similar size. Identification requested. Verified. Approved. 1 minute and 29 seconds. Within variance margin. Marcus allowed himself a slow breath. Not satisfaction. Confirmation. After leaving the branch, he stood on the sidewalk beneath a clear blue sky and called Rachel. Random audit complete, he said. Baseline holds. Rachel responded calmly. National oversight cycle closes next week. Board review scheduled Friday. At headquarters that Friday, the executive board gathered once more around the long walnut table. The quarterly oversight report filled the display screen. External audit confirmed alignment. Customer trust index improved by 12%. Employee satisfaction metrics showed modest growth following clarity in verification protocols. Marcus stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the polished surface. We have transitioned from correction to prevention, he said evenly. The system now protects against discretion drift. A senior board member leaned forward. Do we scale this model beyond verification? Marcus nodded once. Yes, he replied. Loan approvals, credit extensions, fee waivers. Anywhere discretion once replaced structure. The room remained silent, recognizing the scope of that expansion. Correction had begun at a teller counter. It would not end there. Back at the downtown branch, Caroline Pierce reviewed the monthly metrics with her team. Consistency is no longer new, she said calmly. It is standard. The laminated cards remained beside each keyboard, but few employees looked at them anymore. The language had been memorized. The cadence internalized. A young customer approached the counter wearing work boots and a worn jacket, requesting to open a business account. The banker explained requirements clearly, requested documentation uniformly, and processed the application without hesitation. Across the room, an older woman in a designer coat waited patiently for a safe deposit box access. Identification requested. Verified. Uniform tone. No deviation. The rhythm had normalized. Marcus returned to headquarters and stood once more at the window overlooking the skyline. Traffic flowed in disciplined lines. Beneath him, buildings stood tall, their foundations unseen but essential. He reflected briefly on the morning when a single sentence had been spoken across a marble counter. The sentence had been small. The correction had been structural. His phone vibrated softly. A message from Daniel Whitmore appeared. Suburban branch audit cycle complete. No variance detected for 60 consecutive days. Marcus typed back a short response. Maintain vigilance. Quiet gaps reopened loudly. He set the phone down and turned toward his desk, where a draft proposal awaited review. It outlined expansion of the uniform design model into broader corporate governance. Transparent escalation pathways. Real-time demographic neutrality checks. Leadership accountability embedded into compensation structures. He reviewed each line carefully, making small edits to ensure language remained precise rather than performative. Respect must be procedural, not aspirational. Later that afternoon, he convened a small executive working group. Rachel sat to his left. Legal counsel to his right. We codify this into permanent governance, Marcus said calmly. not as response to incident, but as operational standard. The legal counsel nodded. Once codified, deviation becomes violation, she observed. Marcus met her gaze. Exactly. The vote to adopt the expanded oversight model passed without dissent. The institution had moved beyond reaction. It had institutionalized alignment. Weeks later, during a routine visit to the downtown branch, Marcus entered quietly once again. No one paused. No one stared. A teller requested identification from a man in athletic wear with the same steady tone she used for the woman behind him in a tailored blazer. The man smiled and handed over his license. The transaction processed smoothly. Marcus approached the counter for a simple inquiry. "May I see your identification?" the teller asked politely. He handed it over. Verified. Completed. No difference. As he stepped outside into the late afternoon light, he paused briefly and looked back through the glass doors. The marble floors still reflected overhead lights. The counters still gleamed. But something invisible had settled into the architecture. Predictability. Uniformity. Design. His phone buzzed one final time that day. Rachel's message was short. National governance update approved. Permanent implementation confirmed. Marcus read it once and slipped the phone into his pocket. He began walking down the sidewalk, blending into the rhythm of the city. The institution did not need applause. It needed structure. And structure, once aligned, does not announce itself. It operates. The sentence spoken at a counter months earlier no longer echoed. It had been replaced by policy, by process, by permanence. And as the sun lowered across the skyline, casting long shadows over glass and steel, Marcus continued forward with the same calm presence he had carried from the beginning. Quiet authority. Embedded correction. A system redesigned not for him alone, but for anyone who would walk through those doors tomorrow and expect the same standard without knowing why it existed. 6 months after the first 7 minutes exposed a fracture, the correction no longer felt like a response. It felt like identity. First Federal's annual shareholder meeting filled the grand auditorium at headquarters, a space built with glass walls and brushed steel that reflected the city skyline beyond it. Investors, board members, analysts, and senior executives took their seats beneath soft white lighting. A massive screen displayed the bank's performance metrics in clean, confident typography. Revenue stable. Customer retention increased. Compliance consistency sustained at 99.8% nationwide. Marcus Bennett stood backstage for a brief moment before walking into the light. He wore a tailored dark suit over a simple black shirt, the charcoal hoodie absent for the first time in months. Authority did not need symbolism today. It needed clarity. The applause that greeted him was professional, measured, and brief. He did not raise his hand for silence. The room quieted on its own. 6 months ago, he began evenly. "We identified a structural weakness." The screen behind him shifted to a single phrase. Uniform verification governance model. He did not recount the confrontation. He did not dramatize the moment. He outlined the architecture that followed. "We embedded compliance metrics into executive evaluations," he continued. "We standardized approval timelines. We eliminated discretionary variance in customer-facing processes." The slides moved with deliberate pacing, showing comparative charts from before and after implementation. Approval time disparity reduced to statistically insignificant margins. Complaint escalation response time decreased by 42%. Employee retention in customer-facing roles increased by 8%. Correction strengthened performance, Marcus said calmly. Integrity did not cost us profitability. It reinforced it. In the audience, analysts typed notes quickly. A shareholder in the second row leaned toward a colleague and whispered something about industry benchmarks. Marcus shifted to the next slide. It displayed a simple sentence in bold font. "Equity is operational efficiency. Bias creates inefficiency," he said. "Inconsistent review slows workflow. Structured neutrality accelerates it." He paused briefly, letting the concept settle without force. "We did not pursue correction for applause," he added. "We pursued it because systems without accountability eventually fracture." The board members seated behind him nodded subtly. Rachel sat near the front, tablet balanced on her knee, monitoring live engagement metrics from the webcast streaming to investors nationwide. Questions began appearing on the screen moderated in real time. One investor asked, "How do you ensure sustainability of this model beyond executive tenure?" Marcus answered without hesitation. By codifying it into governance, he said. Not as initiative, as requirement. Another question appeared. Has there been resistance internally? Marcus allowed a small, thoughtful pause. Change introduces discomfort, he said evenly. Clarity reduces it. The audience absorbed that without further challenge. After the formal presentation concluded, the meeting transitioned into a moderated discussion. Caroline Pierce joined briefly via live video from the downtown branch, now fully stabilized under her leadership. Our team reports higher confidence in decision-making, she said. Uniform scripting removed ambiguity. Daniel Whitmore also appeared on screen from his suburban branch. Micro-audits prevent drift, he stated. Data alerts before complaints do. Marcus listened quietly, allowing their voices to carry the continuity of correction. When the meeting adjourned, investors filtered out of the auditorium in measured conversation. No dramatic headlines. No public spectacle. Just quiet acknowledgement that the institution had reinforced itself from within. Marcus stepped into the hallway, overlooking the skyline once more. Sunlight filtered through the glass panels, reflecting off nearby towers. Rachel approached him with a concise update. Shareholder sentiment positive, she said. External analysts projecting long-term growth based on governance stability. Marcus nodded once. Structure builds confidence, he replied. Later that afternoon, he requested a live feed from the downtown branch, not for oversight, but for perspective. On the screen in his office, customers moved through the marble lobby in steady rhythm. Identification requested. Verified. Transactions processed with balanced timing. No hesitation. No selective caution. The laminated cards were still present beside each keyboard, though no one appeared to glance at them anymore. Habit had replaced reminder. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair, watching without intervening. His phone vibrated with a message from Rachel. Industry Compliance Council requesting presentation on governance model. Marcus read it carefully before responding. Share framework. Remove narrative context. Focus on structure. He placed the phone down and stood, walking toward the window once again. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass, steel towers rising from concrete foundations that most pedestrians never considered. Systems worked the same way. Foundations mattered more than facades. Weeks later, Marcus accepted an invitation to speak at a national banking conference. The ballroom filled with executives from institutions across the country. He stood at the podium without fanfare. We did not change policy because of public pressure, he said calmly. We changed policy because we measured variance. He displayed the governance model in clear diagrams. Identification scripting. Approval timeline normalization. Real-time demographic neutrality tracking. Executive compensation alignment. He did not mention himself as catalyst. He mentioned architecture. The audience listened with professional interest. Some took notes. Others nodded quietly. After the session, a senior executive from another institution approached him. What triggered your review? She asked. Marcus met her gaze evenly. A routine transaction, he replied. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Back at headquarters, the compliance dashboard remained stable. No red alerts. No yellow warnings. Blue indicators steady. The system did not depend on Marcus's presence at a counter anymore. It depended on embedded design. One evening, months after that first morning at the marble counter, Marcus returned alone to the downtown branch just before closing. The lobby was nearly empty. Caroline greeted him warmly, but without ceremony. Everything holding, she said quietly. Marcus walked slowly through the space, observing the counters, the screens, the employees preparing to log out for the day. A teller completed a final transaction, requesting identification in the same steady tone she had used all afternoon. Verified. Approved. Balanced. Marcus paused near the entrance, hands in his pockets, and looked back across the marble floor one last time. There was no tension in the air now. No undercurrent of assumption. Just process. He turned toward Caroline. Consistency, he said softly, is quiet power. She nodded. And it holds, she replied. Marcus stepped outside into the cool evening air as the glass doors closed behind him. The city lights flickered on one by one against the fading sky. He walked down the sidewalk without hurry, blending into the flow of pedestrians beneath towering buildings. The institution no longer required dramatic intervention. It required maintenance. And maintenance had become discipline. His phone buzzed lightly with one final notification from Rachel. National. Compliance alignment sustained for 180 consecutive days. Marcus read it once, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. He did not smile broadly. He did not celebrate. He simply continued walking beneath the skyline, steady and composed, knowing that what began as a moment had become a standard, and what became a standard would outlast any single voice that once questioned belonging at a counter of polished marble. 9 months after the moment that recalibrated an institution, the change had moved beyond dashboards and boardrooms and into something quieter. It had become reputation. First Federal was now referenced in industry circles not for controversy, but for governance discipline. Marcus Bennett stood in his office overlooking the skyline as winter light filtered through the glass, softer now, reflecting off buildings dusted faintly with early frost. The compliance dashboard remained steady on the wall display behind him, blue indicators stretching across regions like a calm horizon. 180 days of sustained alignment had turned into 270. Rachel entered with a tablet in hand, her expression composed but thoughtful. "There is something you should see," she said. Marcus turned slightly. She placed the tablet on the desk and expanded a news article from a respected financial publication. The headline read, "First Federal sets new standard for uniform verification governance." Marcus scanned the article silently. It detailed the structural reforms, the integration of compliance metrics into executive compensation, the measurable elimination of approval time disparities. It did not mention the morning at the teller counter. It did not mention him personally. It focused on architecture. "They are calling it the Bennett model internally," Rachel added quietly. Marcus looked up at her. "Remove the name," he said evenly. "It is not personal." Rachel nodded. "Understood." Later that week, Marcus visited the downtown branch once more, not as a silent audit, but as a scheduled community roundtable host. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle within the marble lobby after hours. Local small business owners, neighborhood leaders, and longtime customers filled the seats. Caroline Pierce stood near the entrance greeting attendees warmly. Marcus took his place at the front without a podium. "We are here to listen," he began calmly. A local restaurant owner raised her hand. "Since the changes, loan approvals feel clearer," she said. "The criteria are transparent." Marcus nodded. "Transparency reduces suspicion," he replied. A young entrepreneur spoke next. "Before, I always felt like I had to prove more," he admitted. "Now the process is straightforward." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Process should not shift with perception," he said. The room murmured in quiet agreement. Daniel Whitmore attended virtually from his suburban branch, offering updates on expanded governance into credit extension reviews. "Approval timelines are now benchmarked against documented financial indicators only," he explained. "Geographic assumptions removed." Marcus listened without interruption. The roundtable lasted nearly 2 hours. No raised voices. No dramatics. Just conversation grounded in structure. After the chairs were folded and the lobby returned to its polished stillness, Caroline approached Marcus. "Community trust is measurable now," she said softly. Marcus glanced across the marble floor. "Trust is predictable when process is predictable," he replied. As winter deepened, First Federal implemented the next phase of governance integration. Loan committees adopted blind preliminary review models, removing non-essential demographic indicators from early decision stages. Fee waiver policies were standardized with written criteria accessible to customers online. Escalation pathways were simplified and digitally tracked. The system tightened not in restriction, but in clarity. In the executive conference room at headquarters, Marcus addressed senior leadership once again. Snow drifted lightly outside the tall windows, softening the skyline. "We are not finished," he said calmly. "Governance is not an achievement. It is maintenance." A board member nodded. "Industry peers are adopting similar frameworks," she observed. Marcus allowed a brief pause. "Then the standard rises," he said. Weeks later, an unexpected test arrived. A viral social media post accused a regional branch of unfairly delaying a mortgage pre-approval. The claim spread quickly, accompanied by emotional commentary. Rachel entered Marcus's office with the alert displayed on her tablet. "The metrics show no deviation," she said. "Approval timeline within baseline." Marcus read the post carefully. He did not react defensively. Pull full transaction log, he instructed. Within minutes, the data confirmed compliance. The delay referenced in the post was due to missing documentation, not selective scrutiny. Marcus authorized a transparent public statement outlining the documented process without referencing the individual. Calm, factual, measured. Within 24 hours, the narrative shifted. Data had answered where speculation had risen. That evening, Marcus stood alone in his office, city lights reflecting against the darkened glass. The snow had stopped. Streets below shimmered under street lamps. His phone buzzed softly with a message from Rachel. Social media. Engagement stabilizing. No variance detected. Marcus typed back a single response. Remain steady. He placed the phone down and rested his hands on the cool glass of the window. The institution had been tested publicly and privately. The structure held. Months passed. Spring approached. The downtown branch hosted a financial literacy workshop for local high school students. Marcus attended quietly, standing near the back as a banker explained budgeting basics and credit scores. A student raised her hand. How do we know banks treat everyone the same? She asked candidly. The banker answered clearly. Because our processes are standardized and monitored, she said. Marcus watched the students nod thoughtfully. The answer did not rely on reassurance. It relied on design. After the workshop, Marcus stepped outside into the crisp spring air. The skyline stood bright against a clear blue sky. He walked down the sidewalk without announcement, passing the same marble facade where months earlier a different tone had filled the lobby. Now the tone was neutral, consistent, predictable. His phone vibrated once more. Rachel's message appeared. Governance model adopted by 3 additional regional institutions. Marcus read it slowly. He did not claim ownership. He did not seek recognition. He understood the deeper implication. When one structure corrects itself visibly and measurably, others follow. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued walking beneath the tall glass towers, blending into the rhythm of the city once more. The moment at the counter had long since faded from public memory. What remained was architecture, embedded policy, predictable fairness. And as the afternoon sun reflected off the marble facade behind him, Marcus carried the same calm presence forward, knowing that the true measure of power was not in the moment it was questioned, but in the system it left permanently redesigned. 1 year after the morning that quietly tested the foundation of an institution, the transformation no longer felt like reform. It felt like legacy. First Federal's annual governance report was released without spectacle, a clean digital document outlining measurable neutrality benchmarks, escalation transparency metrics, and nationwide uniform verification compliance sustained for 365 consecutive days. No red alerts. No unresolved variances. The architecture held. Marcus Bennett stood in the executive conference room, reviewing the final draft before publication. The skyline beyond the glass walls shimmered under early summer light, bright and steady. Rachel sat across from him, scrolling through the final compliance certification from the Independent Oversight Council. Full validation, she said calmly. No structural discrepancies detected across any branch. Marcus nodded once. Then publish, he replied. Later that afternoon, he returned to the downtown branch where it had begun, not for inspection, not for correction, but for observation. The marble floor reflected sunlight streaming through tall glass windows. Customers moved through the lobby in a balanced rhythm. A construction worker in dusty boots requested a cash withdrawal. Identification requested in steady tone. Verified. Completed. A woman in a tailored business suit requested a wire transfer. Identification requested in the same cadence. Verified. Approved within documented time. No variance. Marcus stood near the entrance, hands loosely in his pockets, listening to the neutral language that had replaced hesitation months ago. Caroline Pierce approached with a quiet smile. 1 year, she said softly. Marcus glanced around the lobby. And it feels ordinary, he replied. Caroline nodded. That is the point. Across the country, similar scenes unfolded in branches large and small. The laminated cards had been replaced with engraved language embedded in onboarding manuals. Uniform verification. No exceptions. The phrase was no longer a corrective reminder. It was doctrine. At headquarters the following week, the board convened for the annual strategic review. Performance indicators remained strong. Customer trust index at its highest level in a decade. Employee engagement surveys reflecting increased clarity and confidence. A board member addressed Marcus directly. "You transformed an incident into architecture," she said. Marcus responded evenly. "We transformed a pattern into policy." The distinction mattered. Later that day, an email arrived from a community advocacy group thanking the bank for measurable transparency. The message referenced clear approval criteria and consistent customer treatment. Marcus read it without outward reaction and forwarded it to regional leadership with a brief note. "Maintain standard. Gratitude is not finish line." As evening approached, Marcus walked alone through the downtown branch once more before closing. The counters were quiet. The last customer exited with a polite thank you. A teller logged out of her system and gathered her belongings. Marcus paused at the same station where months earlier he had been asked for additional verification in a tone that carried assumption. Now the air felt neutral, balanced, predictable. He placed his hand lightly on the counter for a brief moment, not in nostalgia, but in acknowledgement. Design had replaced discretion. Outside, the city hummed beneath a warm summer sky. Cars moved steadily along the avenue. Reflections of glass towers shimmered against the fading light. His phone vibrated softly with a message from Rachel. 1-year compliance alignment sustained. Industry adoption expanding. Marcus read the words carefully before replying. Continue monitoring. Structure must outlast memory. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and began walking down the sidewalk, blending into the rhythm of the city once more. No headlines followed him. No applause echoed behind him. The power of the moment that once unfolded inside marble walls had dissolved into quiet permanence. The institution did not require his presence at a counter anymore. It required adherence to the system that had been written into its core. As the sun dipped below the skyline and streetlights flickered on, Marcus reflected not on confrontation, but on continuity. Respect had not been demanded loudly. It had been engineered deliberately. And as long as process remained consistent, anyone walking through those glass doors tomorrow would encounter the same standard without needing to know why it existed. The marble floors would continue to shine. The counters would continue to reflect light. The language spoken across them would remain steady and neutral. And somewhere within the architecture of that institution, the memory of a single moment would live quietly, not as controversy, but as foundation. 13 months after the quiet recalibration of a marble lobby, the story no longer belonged to a single branch, a single policy update, or even a single institution. It had become precedent. First Federal's governance model was now referenced in regulatory briefings and cited in academic case studies analyzing structural neutrality in financial systems. The shift that began with a measured sentence spoken across a counter had matured into a national benchmark. Marcus Bennett stood once again in his office overlooking the skyline, summer lights spilling across polished floors, the city moving with its usual relentless rhythm below. The compliance dashboard on the wall behind him no longer required daily scrutiny. It operated steadily, quietly, predictably. Blue indicators stretched across the map of the country like a calm horizon. Rachel entered with a thin folder rather than a tablet this time. Federal Advisory Council requested consultation, she said evenly. They are studying uniform verification frameworks for broader recommendation. Marcus looked up slowly. Recommendation, not mandate, he replied. Rachel nodded. 4. Now. Marcus turned toward the window, watching sunlight reflect off the glass towers opposite the building. Standards shift culture, he said quietly. Mandates enforce it. Later that week, he returned to the downtown branch not for inspection, not for a round table, but for something simple. A routine transaction. He entered wearing a light gray jacket over a dark shirt, blending easily into the afternoon crowd. The lobby carried the same calm rhythm it had for months. A delivery driver waited in line behind a corporate attorney. A college student reviewed paperwork at a side desk. The marble floors reflected overhead light without tension. When Marcus reached the counter, the teller smiled politely. How may I assist you today? She asked in steady tone. I would like to withdraw $8,000, he replied calmly. May I please see your identification? She asked, voice even, expression neutral. He handed it over. Verified. Processed. Completed. No additional commentary. No subtle shift in posture. Just procedure. Marcus thanked her and stepped aside, observing one final time. Behind him, The attorney was asked for identification in the same cadence. Verified. Approved. Balanced timing. Predictable. Outside. The air felt warm, the sky a deep summer blue. He paused briefly on the sidewalk, looking back at the glass facade. The building appeared unchanged from the outside. Architecture rarely reveals the policy embedded within it. At headquarters the following month, Marcus addressed a new class of executive trainees in the governance program that now bore no individual name. Leadership is not volume, he said evenly as they sat around a circular table. It is design. He displayed a timeline on the screen. Incident. Audit. Policy. Governance. Adoption. Correction without structure fades, he continued. Structure without vigilance erodes. A trainee raised her hand. What was the hardest part? She asked. Marcus considered carefully. Resisting the urge to react emotionally, he replied. Emotion demands immediate satisfaction. Structure demands long-term discipline. The room absorbed the distinction. After the session concluded, he remained alone in the conference room for a moment, hands resting lightly on the table. The reflection of the skyline shimmered in the glass wall. Months earlier, the same skyline had witnessed a different energy, one of tension quietly unfolding inside marble walls. Now the energy was stable, embedded, enduring. Rachel later joined him with updated adoption metrics from peer institutions. 5 additional banks implementing modified versions of the framework, she said. Marcus nodded once. Then the standard rises again, he replied. Back at the downtown branch that evening, Caroline prepared to close the lobby. A final customer approached the counter requesting a wire transfer. Identification requested. Verified. Approved. Completed. No deviation. As the glass doors locked and the lights dimmed slightly, the marble floor reflected only the soft glow of overhead fixtures. The space felt ordinary, and that ordinariness was the achievement. Marcus walked past the building on his way to a nearby restaurant, not entering this time, just observing the reflection of the city lights against the facade. His phone vibrated gently in his pocket. Rachel's message appeared. National compliance alignment sustained for 395 consecutive days. External adoption expanding. Marcus read the words and allowed a quiet breath. Not pride. Not triumph. Alignment. He typed a brief response. Maintain vigilance. Memory fades. Structure must remain. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued walking beneath the skyline. Cars moved steadily along the avenue. Conversations drifted through warm evening air. No one recognized the significance of the glass doors they passed or the neutral tone that awaited them inside the next morning. And that was the point. The moment that once questioned belonging had been replaced by architecture that guaranteed it. No announcement. No spectacle. Just process. As the night settled over the city and lights flickered across the horizon, Marcus walked forward with the same steady presence he carried from the beginning. Calm. Precise. Unshaken. The marble counters would greet customers tomorrow with the same predictable language. Identification requested. Verified. Completed. Not because of who stood behind the counter. Not because of who stood in front of it. But because the system now required it. And systems, when built with intention, outlast the moments that demanded their creation.